Outside the window, it was damp and dank. October Waterbury was drowning in a gray frown as I sat in my favorite chair by the living room window. At 78, I was still clear-headed and in good physical shape, though time had certainly taken its toll. The tall larch trees along the walkway to the house swayed their tops in the fall wind, once thin twigs Laura and I had planted, but now they were mighty trees. My Laura had been laid to rest in the city cemetery for 5 years, but I still lived in our big country house, which kept the warmth of shared memories. This house remembered 35 years of our life together, every corner of it soaked with stories and moments that could not be left behind. The Waterbury Police Department, where I served as a detective for nearly 4 decades until my retirement at 63, was my second home, but this one was my first and only real one. My daughter Darcy kept hinting that such a large house was an unsustainable burden for a lonely senior citizen. "You need something smaller, Daddy, more appropriate," she'd say, with a concerned expression on her face that I, as a former detective, unmistakably recognized as feigned. In my years of service, I had learned to read people, to see the true motives behind the words, and my daughter's motives were becoming increasingly suspicious. I rose from my chair, leaning on my cane and old knee injury that sometimes resurfaced in the wet weather. 32 years ago, a robber's bullet had nicked a tendon, but that hadn't stopped me from twisting the criminal and continuing my service. The years had taught me to live with that pain, as with so many others. The kettle in the kitchen whistled quietly, releasing a trickle of steam. I brewed the strong tea Laura and I always drank in the morning. The little rituals helped me feel her presence, as if she'd just stepped out into the garden and was about to return. Taking the cup, I went back to the window. The gray sky was cloudy, and it looked as if it might rain any minute. Darcy was due to arrive in an hour. After my pneumonia 2 years ago, she'd gotten power of attorney to handle my financial affairs. I'd been too weak to object then, and I didn't see anything wrong with it. My own daughter. Who else could I trust? But after her recovery, her behavior began to change. She became more and more interested in the condition of the house, talking about its value, about how real estate prices had risen in our neighborhood. I took a sip of my tea and grumbled it was too hot. Patience had always been my strong suit. 40 years on the force had taught me to wait, to observe, to analyze. And now I watched my own daughter as closely as I'd once watched suspects. Laura's picture stood on the mantelpiece. She was smiling, holding a bouquet of wildflowers. I remembered that day. We were walking in the countryside and she was picking daisies and cornflowers, happy as a child. Laura always found joy in simple things. That's probably why our marriage lasted 42 years until she died. She would have been upset to know what our relationship with her daughter had become. My gaze moved to Darcy's picture, college graduation, proud smile, her whole life ahead of her. When had she changed? When did money and possessions become more important to her than relationships? I couldn't pinpoint that moment, but I remembered how our meetings had gradually become more formal and our conversations more superficial. The sound of a car pulling up interrupted my musings. I looked out the window and saw Darcy's silver BMW parked in front of the house. She hadn't arrived alone. Her husband Quentin was sitting next to her. The man had always given me a vague unease. Something in his eyes and his demeanor spoke of secrecy and insincerity. Over the years I had seen such people, outwardly respectable but inwardly rotten. I finished my tea and put the cup on the table. It was time to put on the mask, the role of the slightly absent-minded blind old man that I had been playing in front of them for months. They saw me as weakening, losing my grip. That was good for me. People open up when they think they can't see through them, and I saw through them very well. Darcy walked quickly up the porch steps, Quentin following her, carrying a folder of some kind. Business people, here on a business visit. I walked slowly toward the door, shuffling slightly and leaning more heavily on my cane than necessary. When dealing with predators, it's good to appear weaker than you are. The doorbell rang the tune Laura had once chosen. I hadn't intentionally changed it, like so many other things in the house. This was our home, our fortress, and I wasn't going to give it up without a fight. "Daddy!" Darcy embraced me in a cloud of expensive perfume. "How are you feeling?" "I'm fine, my daughter," I replied, hunched over, making my voice a little shaky. "Day to day, as usual." "Hello, Orson." Quentin held out his hand for a handshake. His palm was dry and cold, and his grip was too strong, as if he were trying to demonstrate superiority. "Hello, Quentin." I grimaced slightly at the pain he seemed to be deliberately inflicting on my old bones. "We brought you some groceries," Darcy said, walking into the kitchen with a bag from the supermarket, "and we wanted to talk." "Talk?" I acted surprised, though I knew exactly what they were getting at. "About what?" "Let's have some tea first," she smiled, taking the groceries out of the bag. While Darcy was in the kitchen, Quentin was in the living room, spreading out some papers on the coffee table. I sat across from him, watching his movements carefully. He was tense, though he tried to appear relaxed. He tapped his fingers nervously on the folder, avoiding a direct gaze, classic signs of a man preparing for an unpleasant conversation. Darcy returned with a tray containing cups of some kind of herbal tea and cookies, which I'd never liked. Laura knew all my preferences, but my daughter seemed to ignore or purposely ignore them. "So," Quentin began, opening the folder, "we found a great place for you, Orson. A real retirement paradise." "It's a condominium for seniors," Darcy picked up, handing me a glossy brochure. "Sunny Hills. It's got everything: medical care, a pool, social activities. You won't be alone." I leafed through the brochure slowly, looking at the pictures of smiling seniors playing board games and doing light exercise. It looked artificial, like an advertising brochure, although it was an advertising brochure. "And how much does this paradise place cost?" I asked, knowing it would confuse them. Darcy and Quentin exchanged quick glances. "It's a worthy place, Dad," Darcy began cautiously. "It can't be cheap, but if we sold the house, we'd have enough money to live there for years." "We?" I raised my eyebrows. "I mean, if you decide to sell the house," she corrected quickly. "Of course, that's your decision. But we strongly recommend that you consider it," Quentin added. "At your age, managing such a large property becomes burdensome." "Where will the money from the sale go?" I asked innocently. "To your account, of course," Quentin answered. "We can help you set up a trust fund that will pay you a monthly allowance." "A trust fund?" I tilted my head as if I didn't understand. Why would it be so complicated? Why not just put the money in my bank account? "Dad," Darcy took my hand in hers, "at your age, it's better to have someone to help manage your finances. There are so many scammers after the money of the elderly." The irony of the situation didn't escape me. My own daughter was warning me against scammers while she herself seemed to be planning to get hold of my assets. "I'll think about it," I said, putting the brochure aside. "I need some time." "Of course, Papa." Darcy stroked my hand. "We're not rushing you. But the real estate market is booming and your house could sell very well. Again, with the emphasis on selling the house." I pretended to be tired, leaning back in my chair. "I'm tired," I said, sighing heavily. "Why don't you come back another time?" "Of course, Papa." Darcy looked worried, though I could see it was only an act. "Are you not feeling well?" "Just tired. Age, you know." She helped me up and led me into the bedroom, where I sank onto the bed. Darcy fussed around, adjusting pillows, fetching water. Quentin stayed in the living room. I could hear him going through something. Papers? Or was he looking for something else? "I want to get some rest," I said. "I'll manage on my own, don't worry." Darcy reluctantly left the room, and I listened to their footsteps. As soon as they were far enough away, I rose quietly and tiptoed to the door. When I opened it, I heard their muffled voices coming from the living room. He'll never agree, Quentin was saying. The old man's too attached to that wreck. He will, Darcy said confidently. I have power of attorney. If he gets stubborn, we can insist on a medical examination. Say he's losing his memory, becoming unable to make decisions. Are you sure? He doesn't seem that crazy. Trust me, any doctor his age would find enough abnormalities to declare him financially incompetent, especially if a little help with the symptoms. A chill ran down my spine. A little help with the symptoms. What did she mean? Put something in the food? Manipulate the test results? I gripped the doorknob tighter. In that moment, I was grateful my years of police work had taught me to control my emotions. Otherwise, I would have stormed into the living room and told those two what I thought of them. But no, I should have been smarter than that. If they were up to what I suspected, I needed proof and a plan of action. I quietly walked back to the bed, lay down, and covered my eyes. A few minutes later, Darcy peeked into the room. "We're leaving, Daddy," she said. "Get some rest. I'll come back tomorrow and bring you some new medication." Medication. I wonder what she was really going to bring. "Okay, my daughter," I smiled in the most harmless way. "I'll be waiting." When they left, I got up and went to the window. I watched their car pull out onto the road. Only when they were out of sight did I let the mask fall away. My face became hard, determined. 40 years of catching criminals, protecting people, believing in the law. And now my own daughter was planning to steal from me, perhaps even worse. I pulled my cell phone out of my pocket, an old model that Darcy thought was proof of my technical backwardness, but I liked its simplicity and reliability. I found the number I wanted in my contacts and pressed call. "Bryce? It's Orson Bleakley." "Yeah, long time no see. Listen, I need some legal advice. It's urgent." "Yeah, it's about power of attorney and possible fraud. Can we meet today?" Great. I'll be there in an hour." I put the phone down and went into the bedroom to change. I moved with confidence, no tremors. Outside of this house, I didn't need to play the role of a frail old man. Bryce Tanner was a longtime friend of mine and one of the best attorneys in Waterbury. We had worked together on many cases when I was a detective. If anyone could help me defend myself against my own daughter, it was him. As I changed my clothes, I looked at the picture of Laura on my bedside table. "I'm sorry, darling," I said quietly. "It seems we haven't been very successful in raising our daughter." I took the keys to the car, an old but well-maintained Ford that Darcy kept suggesting I replace with something more modern. Now I understood why she wanted to do that. It was easier to sell a new car than the old one I was attached to. Walking out of the house, I locked the door. It was time to start my own investigation and prepare myself for whatever my family was up to. 40 years on the force had taught me one thing. Always be one step ahead of those planning a crime, even if those people are your own blood. Bryce Tanner's office was located in downtown Waterbury, in an old red brick building. Despite the rain, I decided to walk, leaving my car a couple blocks away. The walk helped me gather my thoughts, and I wasn't as infirm as I pretended to be in front of my daughter and son-in-law. Bryce met me in the doorway of his office, a stout 60-year-old man with graying dark hair and an attentive gaze. We'd met back in the 80s when he was just starting out as a lawyer and I was already an experienced detective. Since then, our paths had often crossed on the job and then as friends. "Orson, it's damn good to see you," he shook my hand firmly. "Although, from the look on your face, it's not a pleasant occasion." "Yeah." I went inside and sat down in the chair he offered me. "Remember I told you about the power of attorney I gave my daughter when I was sick?" Bryce nodded, looking at me carefully. "I think she and her husband are planning to misuse it. Maybe they want to declare me incompetent and take possession of the house." I told him about Darcy and Quentin's visit today, about the conversation I'd overheard, about how they'd insisted on selling the house and moving to a senior condominium. And most disturbing of all, I heard Darcy talking about helping with the symptoms. I'm afraid they may be trying to put something in my food or medication to make me really look incapable of making decisions." Bryce frowned, tapping his fingers on the table. "Those are serious accusations, Orson, but I've known you long enough not to doubt your adequacy. Well, let's be proactive." We spent the next hour discussing the legal steps. Bryce explained that the power of attorney could be revoked at any time, but it had to be done correctly to protect yourself from possible manipulation by Darcy. "You need to draw up a formal notice revoking the power of attorney," he said, taking notes. "We'll send it to Darcy, to the bank, and to the notary who notarized the original document. But first, I recommend you get a medical examination from an independent doctor so you have an up-to-date opinion of your capacity." "Do you think they'll try to contest the revocation?" "They might. If they really intend to follow through, they may try to prove that you are incapable of making decisions for yourself. A fresh medical report will be your insurance." Bryce helped me draft a revocation of power of attorney document, which I signed in the presence of a notary public who worked in his office. This was the first step in protecting my rights and assets. "Now let's talk about your house," Bryce said when we were done with the paperwork. "You might consider setting up an irrevocable trust to protect your assets. That means you'd put the house into a trust, but you'd retain the right to live in it for the rest of your life." "And Darcy can't sell it?" "She can't. Even if they somehow get you declared incompetent, the house is no longer your personal property and they can't dispose of it." The idea seemed reasonable to me. I wanted to protect not so much myself as the memory of my life with Laura, which had been contained within the walls of the house. The thought that Darcy might just sell it for money was unbearable. "Let's do it," I said firmly. "The paperwork will take a few days," Bryce warned me. "In the meantime, be careful. Don't take any drugs from Darcy, don't sign any papers, and maybe install cameras in the house in case they try anything." I nodded, grateful for the advice. We agreed to meet in 3 days for the execution of the trust. Leaving Bryce's office, I felt a little more confident, but the anxiety for my own safety never left me. On the way back, I stopped at an electronics store and bought some miniature surveillance cameras. The salesman, a young guy with tattoos on his arms, raised his eyebrows in surprise when I chose a state-of-the-art model with night vision and remote access. "Would you like me to help you set them up, sir?" he asked. "No, thank you," I smiled. "I'll take care of it myself. I guess I didn't often see 78-year-olds buying advanced surveillance systems." But it only amused me. People have always underestimated the elderly, considering them technically illiterate. It was another stereotype I used to my advantage. Back home, I spent the evening installing cameras in the living room, kitchen, and my bedroom. Although I hadn't done the technical side of things in the police force, I had the basic skills and learned the rest by perusing the manual. By 10 p.m., the system was fully set up and I could view the footage from any camera on my tablet. The next morning, as promised, Darcy arrived with the medication. This time she was alone, without Quentin, which surprised me a little. "How are you feeling, Daddy?" she asked, placing the bag with the pharmacy logo on the table. "Not bad." I sat in my chair, deliberately wrapped in plaid, even though the house was warm enough. "A little tired." "I brought your usual medications." She started pulling boxes and bottles out of the bag, "and some vitamins that Dr. Hampton recommended." I didn't remember Dr. Hampton, my therapist, recommending any new vitamins. The last time I visited him was 3 months ago, and no changes to my treatment were suggested then. "What kind of vitamins?" I asked, trying to look merely interested, not suspicious. "For cognitive support." Darcy showed me a bottle of pills. "He said they would help with your absent-mindedness. I didn't suffer from absent-mindedness, and Dr. Hampton was well aware of that. Now I was sure that Darcy was lying, perhaps trying to give me something that would affect my mind or my memory. "Wow," I picked up the vial, examining the label. "When did you talk to Dr. Hampton?" "Last week," Darcy lied without blinking an eye. "I called him to check on the dosage of your regular medication." I knew that wasn't true. All of my prescriptions were written with clear instructions, and no changes were expected. But I chose not to show my suspicions. "How thoughtful of you," I smiled, setting the vial aside. "I'll take them later, after breakfast." "How about right now?" Darcy insisted. "They digest better in the morning." "I haven't had breakfast yet," I objected gently. "I prefer to take my medication after a meal." She nodded, but I could see a shadow of irritation on her face. Darcy went into the kitchen and started making breakfast, toast and scrambled eggs. I watched her from the living room, trying not to lose sight of her hands. At one point, she pulled something out of her pocket and added it to the skillet when she thought I couldn't see. I had no doubt now. My own daughter was trying to drug me with something. Perhaps it was the same vitamins she had brought, only in a pulverized form. I felt everything inside clench with pain and anger. How could Darcy, my flesh and blood, do this to me? When she brought breakfast, I thanked her and began to eat slowly, discreetly sending most of the food into the napkin I held in my lap. Darcy sat across from me, watching me with feigned concern. "This is delicious," I complimented, pretending to eat most of it. "You were always a good cook, like Laura." Darcy's face twitched slightly at the mention of her mother. There was a time when we were a happy family, when Darcy was a little girl who adored her parents. What had happened to that child? When did she turn into this cold, calculating woman willing to hurt her own father for the sake of an inheritance? "You can take your vitamins now," she said, handing me a bottle and a glass of water. I took one pill, brought it to my mouth, but at the last moment hid it in my palm, pretending to swallow it. Then I drank the water and smiled. "Thank you for your concern, my daughter." After breakfast, Darcy cleared the table and we moved into the living room. She started talking about how wonderful my life would be at Sunny Hills, how fun and friendly it was, how I wouldn't have to take care of a big house. "I've been thinking about your offer," I said after she had finished her enthusiastic speech. "Maybe you're right and I should really think about moving." Darcy's eyes lit up, but she quickly hid her joy behind a mask of concern. "I'm so glad you're considering it, Dad. It's only for your own good. But before I make a final decision, I'd like to consult with my old friend Nolan Pierce. You remember him? We were on the police force together." Darcy frowned. She certainly remembered Nolan, a principled and shrewd man who had always been good to me and suspicious of Quentin. Why would you consult him? It's a family decision." "Nolan knows real estate," I lied. "He'll help me estimate what the house is really worth. I want to get a fair price." It was a plausible explanation, and Darcy reluctantly agreed. "Okay. When do you plan to meet with him? I'll call him today." After Darcy left, I immediately threw away all the food she had prepared and washed the dishes thoroughly. Then I took out the pill I had supposedly swallowed and put it in a plastic bag. Maybe later I'll be able to figure out what it was. I did call Nolan Pierce, but not for real estate counseling. Nolan was not just a former colleague of mine, but one of the few people I trusted completely. He had opened a private detective agency after retirement and had connections in various areas of the city. We met at a small cafe on the outskirts of Waterbury. Nolan hadn't changed much in the years we hadn't seen each other, the same military bearing, keen eyes and reserved manners. Just a few more gray hairs. "You look better than most 40-year-olds, he said, shaking my hand. "What's wrong, Orson?" "Judging by your voice on the phone, it's serious." I told him the whole story about the power of attorney, about Darcy and Quentin's plans, about the suspicious vitamins and the overheard conversation. Nolan listened without interrupting, only frowning or nodding occasionally. "I think you're right in your suspicions," he said when I was done. "What you're describing sounds like a classic scheme of financial abuse of the elderly. I've seen it many times, but it's usually perpetrated by outsider scammers, not by native children." I chuckled bitterly. When it comes to money, family ties sometimes mean the least. "What have you done so far?" "I've consulted with Bryce Tanner," revoked the power of attorney, and I'm preparing the paperwork to set up an irrevocable trust for the house. Nolan nodded approvingly. Good steps. But I'd suggest one more thing. You said Darcy tried to give you some pills? I pulled out a bag of pills and handed them to him. I can have it analyzed, Nolan said. I have a friend at the lab who will do it confidentially. If it turns up anything illegal, you'll have evidence against Darcy. I don't want to put my daughter in jail, I shook my head. I just want to protect myself and my property. I understand. Nolan tucked the package into his pocket. But information is power. The more evidence you have of their nefarious intentions, the stronger your case will be if it goes to trial. He was right, though it pained me to think that my relationship with my daughter could end up in litigation. There's something else that worries me, Nolan continued. If they're really planning to prove you're incapacitated, they might go further than just putting something in your food. They could try to manipulate doctors, falsify medical records. You need support not only legally, but medically. What do you suggest? I know a doctor I trust, Dr. Lena Chen, a geriatrician with an impeccable reputation. She could do a full examination and give an independent opinion on your condition. It would be another insurance policy in case Darcy and Quentin try to use medical arguments against you. The idea made sense to me, so I agreed. Nolan immediately called Dr. Chen and made an appointment for the next day. One more thing, Orson, Nolan said as we said goodbye. Be careful with food and medicine. Don't take anything Darcy gives you, and maybe you should move somewhere else for a while until things settle down. No, I answered firmly. I will not leave my home. It's what I'm fighting for. Then maybe I could stay with you for a few days, just to be on the safe side. The offer was tempting, but I shook my head. Not yet, no. I've installed security cameras and I'll be careful. If the situation escalates, I'll contact you right away. Nolan reluctantly agreed, but made me promise to call him every day and immediately report any suspicious behavior on the part of Darcy or Quentin. In the days that followed, I carefully followed the plan that Bryce and Nolan and I had devised. Had an examination with Dr. Chen, who confirmed that my cognitive status was normal for my age, and even noted that it was better than many of her patients younger than me. Bryce prepared all the paperwork to set up the trust, and we set up an appointment to sign it. Nolan reported that the analysis of the pills showed the presence of a strong sedative that would cause drowsiness, lethargy, and temporary memory impairment, just the kind of symptoms that Darcy and Quentin could use to prove my incapacity. The evening before my meeting with Bryce to sign the trust documents, I sat in my office looking through old photo albums. One of the photos showed Darcy at the age of 10, smiling, pigtailed, holding a trophy for winning the school talent contest. Standing next to her were Laura and I, proud and happy. Looking at that picture, I felt my heart clench with pain. Where is that loving child? When and why did she change? Maybe it was my fault. Maybe I was too strict or, on the contrary, not attentive enough. I put the album aside, realizing that now was not the time for self-abuse. Whatever my mistakes in the past, they didn't justify what Darcy and Quentin were planning to do to me now. I had to protect myself, my home, and the memory of Laura, and I was willing to do whatever was necessary to do so. I woke up the next morning determined to finish what I had started. Today, I was to sign the trust documents that would protect my home from the encroachment of Darcy and Quentin. This was an important step in my plan, and I felt ready for it. A week after signing the trust documents for my house, I was sitting in the living room looking at the morning paper. The day was clear and sunny, one of those rare October days when fall shows its best side. A light breeze played with the fallen leaves in the garden, and I thought it would be nice to go for an afternoon walk. The phone on the table beside me vibrated. I glanced at the screen, a message from Darcy. Strange, she usually preferred to call rather than text. Opening the message, I read, "Your country house and car are sold. We're leaving tomorrow." I reread the message 3 times, unable to believe my eyes. Darcy wasn't just continuing her manipulations. She was taking action. Somehow, she'd managed to sell my house and car without having any legal rights to do so. I revoked the power of attorney a month ago, notifying both the bank and the notary. Before I could even think about what to do, the phone rang. Darcy. I took a deep breath, gathering my thoughts, and answered as calmly as I could. Good morning, sweetheart. Good morning, Daddy. Darcy's voice sounded strangely upbeat, as if she was barely containing her joy. Did you get my message? Yes, I just read it. What did you think? I got it, but you forgot something, I said in an even tone. There was a pause on the other end of the line. What are you talking about? Darcy finally asked, a note of concern in her voice. Let's discuss it in person. Come over and we'll clear it up. Another pause. All right, she agreed uncertainly. Quentin and I will be there in an hour. We ended the conversation and I immediately called Bryce to tell him what had happened. He was as surprised as I was. It's impossible, Orson. The power of attorney has been revoked. The trust documents are registered. The house is legally protected. She can't sell it. And yet she claims she did it. Maybe she's bluffing, Bryce suggested. Or, he fell silent, clearly contemplating some unpleasant thought. Or what? Or maybe she forged your signature on the sale papers. That's a serious offense, Orson. I took a deep breath. Had Darcy descended into outright criminality? What do I do, Bryce? Don't show all your cards at once. Find out exactly what she did, how she sold the house, what documents she used. Record the conversation. It might come in handy if this goes to trial. And call me as soon as they leave. I'll be in touch. After talking to Bryce, I called Nolan and told him about Darcy's message. He reacted more sharply than Bryce. I'm on my way to your place right now, he stated. I don't want you to meet with them alone. No, Nolan, I objected. They must think they've caught me off guard, that I'm alone and defenseless. That way they're more likely to give themselves away. Are you sure? It could be dangerous. I'm an ex-cop, don't forget, I grinned. And I have something they won't expect. We agreed that Nolan would wait for my call after Darcy and Quentin's visit, and if I didn't call within 2 hours, he'd come to see if everything was okay. I spent the next hour getting ready. I pulled all the important documents out of the safe, the notice of revocation of power of attorney, the papers creating the trust, the medical report from Dr. Chen confirming my legal capacity, and the results of the pills Darcy had tried to give me. I laid it all out neatly on the desk in my office, but covered it with newspaper so it wouldn't be immediately visible. Then I checked to see if the security cameras I'd installed around the house were working. They were fine, recorded and stored in a cloud storage system that only I had access to. Exactly an hour after my phone call with Darcy, I heard the sound of a car pulling up. I looked out the window and saw Darcy and Quentin getting out of their BMW. Their faces were tense, but Quentin's gait was confident, almost triumphant. He was carrying some kind of file folder. I turned on the call recording app on my phone and put it in my shirt pocket so that the microphone wasn't covered. Then I took a deep breath, gathering my strength, and went to open the door. Daddy, Darcy hugged me with feigned warmth. How are you today? The usual, I allowed myself a slight smile. Come in, I've made tea. We settled in the living room. I deliberately sat down in my favorite chair, showing that I felt like the owner here, despite their statements about selling the house. So, I began, as everyone settled down with cups of tea, tell me about your message. What do you mean the house and car have been sold? Darcy and Quentin exchanged glances. Then Quentin opened his folder and pulled out some documents. Orson, he began with the fake friendliness he always used when talking to me, we have come to the conclusion that this large house has become a burden to you. As your next of kin, we have a duty to look after your welfare. Is that why you sold my house? I asked with slight surprise in my voice. Using the power of attorney you gave Darcy, Quentin continued, we found an excellent buyer. The amount of the deal was more than we expected. We've already put down a deposit for a place at Sunny Hills, that wonderful retirement community we were talking about. And when did the deal go through? I asked, taking a sip of tea. 3 days ago, Darcy replied. We've done everything legally perfect. Here are the documents. She handed me the papers and I looked at them carefully. There was a sales contract, a deed of transfer, some additional agreements, and everywhere was my signature, or rather, a skillful forgery. I was impressed by the quality of the forgery, but I could still notice a few small differences from my real handwriting. Did you sell the car too? I asked, handing back the papers. Yes, the old Ford wasn't worth much anymore, but we found a collector who paid a decent amount, Quentin explained. That money will also go to pay for your stay at the boarding house. I nodded slowly, as if considering what I'd heard. When do I have to vacate the house? Tomorrow, Darcy said, impatience in her voice. The new owners want to move in as soon as possible. We've already packed most of your things. I raised my eyebrows in genuine surprise. You went into my house without me and touched my things? Only the essentials, Dad, Darcy said quickly. We wanted to make the move easier for you. I was silent for a while, watching their faces. Darcy looked tense, but there was anticipation in her eyes. Quentin was more reserved, but the corners of his lips occasionally lifted in a smug smile. Well, I said at last, you've really thought this through. But there is one problem. The thing you forgot, Darcy. What are you talking about? She frowned. The power of attorney you used to sell the house is no longer valid. I revoked it a month ago. Darcy's face changed as if someone had turned off the light behind her eyes. What? She exhaled. I revoked the power of attorney, I repeated calmly. Notice was sent to you, the notary, and the bank. Here's a copy. I pulled a folded sheet of paper from my pocket and handed it to her. Darcy unfolded it with trembling hands and began to read. Her face paled with each line. That's impossible, Quentin intervened, snatching the document from Darcy's hands. We didn't receive anything. That's strange, I shrugged. I have the notice of delivery. Maybe you just forgot? Even so, Quentin tried to sound confident, but I could see his knuckles turning white as he clutched the paper. The sale has already taken place. The papers have been signed. The money's been transferred. Signed? I allowed myself a slight smile. You mean this forgery of my signature? I pointed to the purchase agreement. I have to say, it's not bad work, but there are still some differences. Any expert handwriting expert will attest to that. Darcy and Quentin looked at each other. There was panic in their eyes. You can't prove anything, Quentin hissed, instantly shedding his mask of friendliness. I'm not sure, I shook my head. I have something else. Let's go to my office. They followed me reluctantly. In my office, I removed the newspaper that covered the papers on the table. Here is a medical report from an independent doctor confirming my full legal capacity. I pointed to the first document. Here are the results of the pills you, Darcy, tried to give me under the guise of vitamins, a strong sedative that could cause dementia-like symptoms. And here, I pointed to the third document, the deed to the irrevocable trust into which I had transferred the house the week before your so-called transaction. Legally, I no longer owned the house at the time of the sale, so even if the power of attorney had been valid, you couldn't have sold it. Darcy turned even paler, if that was even possible. Quentin, on the other hand, flushed with anger. You planned this whole thing, he shouted. You set it all up to make us look like crooks. I was just protecting myself and my property, I replied calmly. After I overheard you talking about how you were planning to stupefy me and take the house. You overheard us? Darcy gasped. And videotaping. I pointed to one of the hidden cameras in the corner of the room, including the time you put something in my food. And our conversation today is being recorded too. Quentin took a step toward me, his face contorted with rage. You old geezer, you think you've outsmarted us? Yes, I wouldn't advise you to make any sudden moves, I interrupted him. Any violence on your part will only aggravate the situation. And I have friends who know about our meeting and are ready to intervene if necessary. Quentin stopped, clenching and unclenching his fists. What do you want? Darcy asked, defeat evident in her voice. The truth, for starters, I answered. How long have you been planning this? And why? Darcy remained silent, averting her gaze. Quentin snorted. What difference does it make? You're an old man anyway, you don't have long to live. And the house is worth a fortune. What do you need it for? We need that money more. Need it more? I raised my eyebrows. For what? None of your business, he snapped. We're having money problems, Dad, Darcy finally said. Quentin's investment didn't work out. We're in debt. A house would have solved all our problems. So you decided to trick me, drug me, and send me to a nursing home to die. We weren't going to, Darcy began, but I interrupted her. Don't lie to me again. I heard you talk about how you were going to help with the symptoms. I know that the pills you were giving me could have seriously damaged my health. Darcy lowered her head, unable to meet my gaze. So, what now? Quentin asked. Call the police? Sue us? Make your daughter look like a criminal? I stared at them both for a long time. Despite everything they'd done, Darcy was still my daughter. The daughter Laura and I had once loved and invested so much hope in. Here's what happens next, I said finally. You will immediately contact the buyers and cancel the deal. You'll say there was a mistake, that the paperwork was invalid, whatever. Then you'll return my car. I'm sure you haven't handed it over to the new owner yet. And after that, we'll never see each other again. What? Darcy looked up at me in surprise. You're not going to file a police report? I won't, I shook my head. On one condition, you leave me alone. No contact, no attempts to come back into my life. And of course, no claims to the inheritance after my death. You're cutting your daughter out of your life? Quentin asked with feigned indignation. No. I looked directly at Darcy. She cut herself out when she decided that my possessions were more important than my life. Darcy cried, covering her face with her hands. Quentin put his hand on her shoulder, but his gaze was cold and calculating. He was clearly assessing the situation, weighing the risks. All right, he said at last. We agree. We'll cancel the deal, return the car, and disappear from your life. But you have to give us all the records and documents you've collected against us. I grinned. I don't think you're in a bargaining position. The records will stay with me as insurance. If you keep your word and leave me alone, they will never see the light of day. If not, I'll throw up my hands. I have friends in the police and prosecutors' offices. They'll be happy to take a look at these materials. Quentin wanted to object, but Darcy put her hand on his forearm, stopping him. We agree, she said quietly. I'll call the buyers today. And return the keys to the house and garage, I added. All the copies you have. They reluctantly pulled out the keys and put them on the table. I was sure they had duplicates, so I decided to change the locks as soon as they left. That's all for now. I stood up, signaling that the conversation was over. You may go. Darcy took a step toward me as if she wanted to hug me goodbye, but I stepped back. Her face contorted in pain, but I remained adamant. The lies were too many, the betrayal too deep. They left the study in silence, walking through the living room to the front door. I followed them, making sure they took nothing from the house. On the threshold, Darcy turned around one last time. Daddy, Goodbye, Darcy, I said, not letting her finish. I hope the money you were willing to sacrifice your father for was worth it. I closed the door without waiting for a reply and turned the lock. I watched through the window as they got into the car and drove away. Only when their car was out of sight did I let myself sink into the chair and exhale. My hands were shaking, but not from weakness, from restrained emotion. 40 years on the force had taught me to control my feelings, not to show weakness in front of the enemy. But now that I was alone, the protective barrier was crumbling. I felt anger, hurt, disappointment, and a strange relief that it was finally over. Pulling out my phone, I called Bryce and briefly told him what had happened. He was impressed with the way I handled the situation, but insisted on still going to the police. "What they did is a serious crime, Orson," he said. "Forgery, fraud, maybe even attempted bodily harm. Are you sure you want to just let them go?" "I'm sure," I answered firmly. "I don't want the last years of my life spent litigating with my own daughter. Let them go. I have all the proof I need in case they come back." Bryce reluctantly agreed, but made me promise to contact him immediately if Darcy or Quentin violated the arrangements. I then called Nolan and told him about the meeting as well. He was less understanding than Bryce. "You have to file a report, Orson," he insisted. "These people tried to steal from you, maybe even hurt you. They deserve to be punished." "I know," I sighed, "but she's still my daughter. And Laura wouldn't want me to send her to prison." Nolan was silent for a moment, then said, "You've always been too soft, old man. But it's your decision, and I respect it. Just be careful. Men like Quentin don't give up easily." "I'll be on my guard," I assured him. "By the way, could you help me change the locks? Just in case." "Sure," Nolan agreed. "I'll be at your place in an hour with tools." After I talked to Nolan, I sat back in my chair and looked at the picture of Laura on the mantelpiece. She was smiling, that warm, understanding smile I loved so much. "I'm sorry, darling," I whispered. "I couldn't keep our family together. But I did protect our home, our memories." It was starting to rain outside the window, the drops drumming on the glass as if trying to say something. I felt a strange desolation and, at the same time, liberation. The battle had been won, but at what cost? I'd lost my daughter, or maybe I'd lost her a long time ago. I just didn't want to admit it. The rain intensified, turning into a torrential downpour. I sat in the silence of my house, listening to its noise and thinking about what would happen next, about how I would go on living alone, without a family, with only memories of better times. But I knew one thing. No matter what happened, I had maintained my dignity and protected what was truly important to me. The next week wasn't easy. I changed the locks on the house, installed an additional security system, and tried to get back to as normal a life as I could after what had happened. But the calm didn't last long. On Thursday morning, there was a persistent knock on the door. When I opened it, I saw a tall man in an expensive suit, a leather briefcase in his hand. "Mr. Bleakley?" he asked in a formal tone. "My name is Robert Phelps, and I represent James and Elizabeth Harrington. They entered into a contract of sale for this house with your daughter acting on your behalf under a power of attorney." I nodded, waiting for the continuation. "Yesterday, your daughter contacted my clients and informed them that the deal was being unilaterally terminated. The Harringtons had already paid a substantial deposit, sold their property, and were now in a very unpleasant position. Come in, Mr. Phelps." I opened the door wider. "I think we have something to talk about." In the living room, I briefly explained the situation. The power of attorney had been revoked a month ago, the house had been placed in a trust, and my daughter's actions were illegal. "I understand," Phelps shifted his eyebrows, "but my clients acted in good faith. They checked the documents your daughter provided, and they had no reason to doubt their authenticity." "I sympathize with your clients," I said sincerely. "But they should claim Darcy and Quentin Russell, not me. It was the Russells who received their money and provided false documents." "I'm afraid it's not that simple," Phelps objected. "If the power of attorney was revoked, but the notice was not properly received by your daughter, there may be questions about the validity of the revocation. The notice was sent by registered mail with return receipt." I pulled a copy of the receipt from the folder. "Here's the proof. It was received and signed personally by Darcy Russell on September 28th. Phelps scrutinized the document. What about the trust? When exactly was the house placed in trust? October 15th, I showed him the relevant papers. A week before Darcy made an illegal deal with your clients. The lawyer took a long look at the documents, then sighed. It seems my clients were indeed victims of fraud, but they suffered significant losses. They sold their house, paid a deposit of 15% of the transaction value, which I'm sure Darcy and Quentin are obligated to return, I interrupted. And if they don't, your clients have every right to go to the police. Would you mind if I made copies of these documents? Phelps asked, pointing to the papers. Not at all, I nodded. In fact, I'm willing to testify in writing about my daughter's actions if it will help your clients get their money back. We spent another hour discussing the details. Phelps made copies of all the documents and recorded my testimony. As he left, he shook my hand. Thank you for your cooperation, Mr. Bleakley. I have to say, not every father is willing to testify against his own daughter, even if she did wrong. I was a police officer for 40 years, Mr. Phelps, I replied, and I've always believed that the law should be the same for everyone. After the lawyer left, I immediately called Bryce and told him about the visit. He advised me to be prepared for the possibility that the case might take a serious turn. If the Harringtons file a police report, there will be an investigation, he warned me, and you'll probably have to give a formal statement. I understand, I said, and I'm ready for it. 2 days later, Bryce's prediction came true. Nolan called me. Orson, I have news. The Harringtons have filed a police report. The charges are serious. Fraud, forgery, misappropriation of large sums of money. The case has been referred to the Economic Crimes Unit. A friend of mine works there. He said they've already started an investigation. Darcy and Quentin have been arrested? I asked, feeling a strange mixture of anxiety and satisfaction. Not yet, but they've been called in for questioning. And Orson, they'll want to question you as a witness too. I wasn't surprised. Part of me was even relieved that now everything would come out and the truth would be officially established. The next day, 2 detectives from the Economic Crimes Unit came to my house. One of them, Detective Morgan, turned out to be a former patrolman I had once worked with. He was very young when I retired, but he remembered me well. Detective Bleakley, he shook my hand warmly. I never thought I'd be taking a statement from you as a victim. You've taught me half of what I know about police work. Life is full of surprises, Morgan, I smiled sadly, and not always pleasant ones. I told the detectives everything from the beginning. The illness 2 years ago, the power of attorney, the suspicions that began to arise when I recovered, the overheard conversations between Darcy and Quentin, the vitamins that turned out to be strong sedatives, my precautionary measures, and finally, the last meeting when they told me the house was for sale. Do you have evidence that your daughter tried to give you the sedatives without your knowledge? Asked the second detective, Hoffman. I have the results of the analysis of the pills. I handed them a copy of the lab report. And a videotape that showed her putting something in my food when she thought I couldn't see. The detectives looked at each other. These are serious charges, Mr. Bleakley, Hoffman said. Not only fraud, but possible attempted bodily harm. I understand, I nodded. And believe me, it's not easy for me to make these charges against my own daughter. What do you want out of this case? Morgan asked. What are you trying to accomplish? I wondered. What did I really want? Revenge, justice, or just peace? I want the Harringtons to get their money back, I said at last. And I want Darcy and Quentin to leave me alone, forever. What about criminal prosecution? Hoffman asked. Would you be willing to testify in court? If I have to, I nodded. But frankly, I'd prefer to avoid a public trial if at all possible. Morgan nodded understandingly. We'll do our best to accommodate your wishes, Detective Bleakley. But it's up to the prosecutor to decide whether to prosecute based on the evidence collected. After the detectives left, I felt emotionally drained. It was one thing to defend myself against my daughter's fraud, and quite another to give formal testimony against her that could have resulted in jail time. Despite everything she'd done, the thought of Darcy behind bars was agonizing. Nolan called in the evening. "How are you?" he asked with genuine concern. "I've been better," I admitted. "I never thought I'd be testifying against my own daughter in my old age." "I understand." I could hear the sympathy in his voice. "But you're doing the right thing, Orson. Darcy made her choice when she chose to deceive you and take your property." "I know," I sighed, "but that doesn't make it any easier." "Look," Nolan continued after a brief pause, "I talked to Morgan. They called Darcy and Quentin in for questioning this afternoon, and they seem to be in big trouble. The Harringtons aren't the only ones affected. There's also some collector they sold your car to, and he filed a report when the deal fell through, too." "So what now?" The D.A quote. "S office is considering filing formal charges. But, there is an option. If Darcy and Quentin make full restitution to all the victims, including moral damages, and if you, as the main victim, do not insist on criminal prosecution, the case can be closed without a trial." I thought about it. It would be the perfect solution. The Harringtons and the collector would get their money, and Darcy would avoid jail. "But where would they get that kind of money?" I asked. "You said yourself that they were in debt." "I don't know," Nolan answered honestly. "Maybe they borrowed from Quentin's relatives or sold something valuable. But Morgan said it was their only chance of avoiding serious trouble with the law." The next day, Bryce called me. "Orson, Darcy, and Quentin's lawyer came to see me. They want to make a settlement." "What kind of settlement?" "They're willing to make full restitution to the Harringtons and the collector, return your car, and sign a waiver of any inheritance claims. In return, they ask that you don't press for a criminal prosecution." "Can they reimburse that amount of money?" I questioned. "Apparently, yes." The lawyer said that Quentin had sold his stake in the investment company. "It doesn't cover all their debts, but it's enough to offset the damages in this case." I was silent for a moment, pondering the proposition. On the one hand, Darcy and Quentin deserved to be punished for what they had done. On the other, I really didn't want my daughter to end up in prison. "What do you think, Bryce?" I finally asked. "As your lawyer, I think it's a reasonable offer. The victims will be compensated. You'll avoid having to go through a trial, and your daughter will avoid jail time. As your friend," he hesitated, "as your friend, I understand that you probably want justice, and no one would judge you for it." "I want peace, Bryce," I said quietly. "I want to end this chapter of my life and move on. If this agreement will help with that, I'll agree." "Good." Bryce seemed relieved. "I'll contact their lawyer and start preparing the paperwork. But I do have one condition. Everything has to be legally perfect. No loopholes, no opportunities for Darcy and Quentin to challenge the agreement or make new claims in the future." "I agree," I nodded, though he couldn't see it over the phone. "One more thing. I want the agreement to make it clear that they have no right to contact me or come near my house. No exceptions." "Got it. I will include a restraining order clause." Over the next week, lawyers for both sides worked on the agreement. Bryce kept me updated on the progress of the negotiations. The Harringtons agreed to withdraw their police report in exchange for full reimbursement of all costs and an additional amount for moral damages. The collector to whom Darcy and Quentin had tried to sell my car was also compensated. Finally, all the paperwork was ready. Bryce offered to organize the signing at his office. "Would Darcy and Quentin be there?" I asked, feeling a sudden excitement. "If you don't want to see them, we can organize the signing at different times," Bryce suggested. I wondered. Part of me wanted to see my daughter one last time, to tell her something important, but another part of me realized that it would only add to the pain. "Let them sign separately," I decided. I wasn't ready to meet with them. "Okay," Bryce agreed. "They'll sign in the morning. You sign in the afternoon." On the appointed day, I arrived at Bryce's office. He met me with a folder of documents. "It's done, Orson. They signed all the papers, gave me your car keys back. It's already in your yard. My assistant moved it an hour ago." I nodded, feeling strangely numb. Everything was ending so mundanely, the signatures on the paper, the return of the keys, like a normal business transaction, not the end of a family tragedy. "There's something else." Bryce handed me a sealed envelope. "Darcy left this for you. Said it was personal." I took the envelope, not knowing if I wanted to open it. What could she have written? An apology, or new accusations? "You can read it later," Bryce said, noticing my confusion. "Let's finish the paperwork now." I nodded silently and signed the papers he'd prepared. With each signature, I felt another thread breaking between me and my daughter. It was painful, but at the same time, liberating. When it was done, Bryce shook my hand. "That's it, Orson. You're now officially free of them, and they won't be able to claim your inheritance no matter what happens." "Thank you, Bryce." I shook his hand sincerely. "For everything." I left the office and got into my car, the old but reliable Ford that Darcy had been so eager to sell. Everything inside was the same as before, except there was a new vanilla-scented air freshener. I grinned. Even here, they couldn't resist leaving their mark. On the way home, I stopped at the park where I'd once walked with Laura. I sat down on a bench by the pond and finally opened the envelope from Darcy. Inside was a short letter written in her neat handwriting. "Dad, I know that no words can justify what we did. I'm not asking for forgiveness because I realize I don't deserve it. I just want you to know that it wasn't your fault. You and Mom gave me everything you could. Love, care, education. What kind of person I grew up to be is the result of my own choices, my own weaknesses. Quentin insists that we were right, that you're going to die soon anyway, and will inherit the house. But I know we crossed the line. I betrayed you. I betrayed my mom's memory, and I will live with that for the rest of my life. We're leaving Waterbury. We're starting a new life in another town. I promise you'll never see or hear from us again. It's the last thing I can do for you. Goodbye, Daddy. Darcy." I folded the letter and tucked it back into the envelope. No tears, no sudden outburst of forgiveness or reconciliation. Just quiet, dull pain and a sense of finality. My daughter, my only child, had become a stranger to me, and now we were separated by a gulf that could never be bridged. When I returned home, I saw my neighbor, Harold Turner, on the porch. We had known each other for over 20 years, since he had moved into the house across the street. Harold, a former history teacher who had retired 10 years ago, was one of the few people I'd kept in regular contact with since Laura's death. "Orson," he waved at me. "Good to see you. You're just in time for the barbecue." Rita made her famous ribs. Rita, Harold's wife, was an excellent cook and often invited me over for lunches or dinners. They both knew about my problems with Darcy and Quentin. Not all the details, of course, but enough to understand the situation. "Thank you, Harold," I tried to smile, but it didn't come out very convincingly. "Is something wrong?" He noticed my mood right away. "It's a long story," I sighed. "I officially severed all ties with Darcy today." Harold nodded understandingly. "I never told you this, Orson, but I always saw that there was something wrong with her. Too calculating for a daughter. Too little sincerity in her concern for you. Why didn't you tell me?" "What would it have changed?" He shrugged. "You loved her. She was your daughter. My suspicions would have proved nothing and only upset you." There was truth in his words. Even if Harold or someone else had warned me about Darcy earlier, I probably wouldn't have believed it. A parent's love is often blind. "So, are you going to the barbecue?" Harold asked, changing the subject. "There will be more Normans and Sam Pearson, remember him. He was on the police force too." "Yeah, sure." I nodded, feeling like I didn't want to be alone tonight. Give me half an hour to change and I'll be there. Great. Harold patted me on the shoulder. And Orson, whatever happens to Darcy, remember, you've always been a good father. It's not your fault she chose this path. I nodded gratefully, not trusting my voice to respond. Harold's words echoed Darcy's letter in a surprising way, and it made me wonder, maybe she was right? Maybe I really had done my best as a father, and the outcome was determined not by my actions but by her own choices. An evening at the Turners turned out to be just what I needed. Good food, good company, talking about everything but my family problems. Sam Pearson, with whom we'd once worked in the same department, told funny stories about police life. The Normans, an elderly couple who had lived on our street for 40 years, discussed plans for a trip to Europe. No one mentioned Darcy or recent events, but I could feel their silent support. They knew I was going through a rough patch, and they tried to surround me with warmth and care without invading my personal space. As the evening drew to a close, Rita took me aside. Orson, I've been meaning to ask you for a long time. Would you be interested in joining our gardening group? We meet twice a week, working in the community garden. It's very soothing to tinker with plants, to see them grow under your hands. I was touched by her offer. Rita was clearly trying to help me find a new occupation, a new meaning in my life now that I had finally broken up with my daughter. Thank you, Rita. I smiled sincerely. I'll think about it. To be honest, I'd never really done much gardening. Laura was an expert at it, not me. All the more reason to give it a try, she winked. It's never too late to learn something new. Coming home, I felt strangely peaceful. Yes, I had lost my daughter, or rather, I realized I had lost her a long time ago. But I wasn't alone. I had friends. I had people who cared about me, not because of my possessions or inheritance, but simply because they valued me as a human being. Entering the house, I made my way to the study and pulled out an old photo album. I flipped through the pages, looking at pictures of Darcy at different times in her life. A little girl with pigtails, a teenager with a book in her hands, a college graduate in a robe and cap. When did it all go wrong? Where did I go wrong? Maybe it was the fact that I worked too hard when she was little. Or was it that after Laura died, I became distant from everyone, including my daughter? Or maybe Quentin's influence was stronger than all the values Laura and I had tried to instill in her. I closed the album realizing I would never get answers to these questions. And maybe it didn't matter. What was done was done. Now it was time to look forward, not look back. That night I couldn't sleep for a long time, thinking about the future. For the first time in a long time, I was truly free. From Darcy's manipulations, from worrying about my possessions, from having to pretend to be weaker and more absent-minded than I really was. What would I do with that freedom? Perhaps actually take up gardening, as Rita suggested, or travel. I've always wanted to see the Grand Canyon, but never found the time for such a trip. Or perhaps I could use my experience as a police officer to help other elderly people defend themselves against scammers and unscrupulous relatives. As I fell asleep, I thought about Harold's words and Darcy's letter. Maybe they were right. Maybe I really shouldn't blame myself for the way things had turned out. I wasn't a perfect father. There's no such thing. But I loved my daughter, and I did the best I could for her. That she chose the path of deceit and betrayal was her decision, not mine. It's been 6 months since I signed the agreement with Darcy and Quentin. A lot has changed in that time. Every morning I woke up in my large country home and felt the emptiness of those walls pressing in on me. Too many rooms for one person, too many memories, both good and bad. One day, sitting in the garden watching Rita Turner prune the roses Laura had once planted, I suddenly realized that I was holding on to the house not out of love for it, but out of fear of change. I had fought so long for the right to stay here that I had forgotten to ask myself, did I really want it? "What are you thinking about, Orson?" Rita asked, noticing my blank stare. That maybe it was time to move on, I answered, surprising myself. This house, it was starting to look more like a museum of the past than a place to live. Rita nodded understandingly. You know, I've always believed that home is not walls, but people and memories. And sometimes, in order to keep bright memories, you have to leave behind a place where too much pain happened. Her words struck a chord in my heart. That same day, I called Nolan and asked if he knew of a good realtor. He was surprised, but didn't argue or discourage me. Are you sure, Orson? After all you've been through to keep this house? That's exactly why, I said. I've proven to myself and everyone else that it's my choice, not someone else's decision for me. And now I'm choosing to move on. Nolan introduced me to Emma Wright, an experienced realtor specializing in luxury real estate. She priced my home much higher than I expected. The market is booming right now, Mr. Bleakley, she explained, and your house is in great condition, with a large lot and in an upscale neighborhood. It won't take him long to find a buyer. Emma was right. 3 weeks after the house went on the market, I had 3 offers, all above the asking price. I chose a young family with 2 small children. They reminded me of Laura and me when we first moved here. Something in their eyes, full of plans and hope for the future, touched me. I wanted this house to be filled with children's laughter again. With the sale of the house resolved, I started looking for a new place to live. Nolan offered me several options in downtown Waterbury, not far from his own apartment. One of them immediately caught my eye, a spacious apartment on the 4th floor of an old brick building, with high ceilings, large windows, and a view of the city park. There's an elevator here, Nolan remarked as we looked around the apartment. Important for us old people. Speak for yourself, I grinned. I could still walk up the stairs without shortness of breath. It was true. After Darcy, I'd decided to take more care of my health, and I'd started working out regularly in the pool and going for long walks. At 78, I felt better than I had in 10 years. I liked the apartment and decided not to delay in buying it. Fortunately, the owner was willing to make a quick deal, and within a month I was already moving things to the new place. I decided not to take most of the furniture from the old house. It was too bulky for the apartment and too loaded with memories. Instead, I bought new, modern furniture, choosing light colors and functional design. I kept only a few items that were really precious to me. The rocking chair Laura liked to sit in, her mahogany desk, family photos, and, of course, everything related to my career as a police officer, awards, photos with colleagues, and old badge. Moving day was sunny and warm despite the late fall weather. Harold and Rita Turner came over to help pack the last of my belongings and say goodbye. "We'll miss you, neighbor," Harold said, shaking my hand firmly. "But promise me you'll stop by our barbecues." "I will," I smiled. "Besides, downtown isn't that far away." Rita hugged me, and I felt her discreetly wipe away her tears. "I took cuttings from Laura's rose bushes," she said. "I'm going to plant them at my place, so that part of your garden will always be there." The gesture touched me to the core. Laura's roses had always been her pride, and she had grown them with such love and care. Knowing that they would continue to bloom in Rita's garden was important to me. One last look at the house where most of my life had been spent evoked a strange feeling, not sadness, but rather peacefulness. I was grateful to these walls for all the good things they had given me, and I was ready to let go of all the bad things that had happened here. Moving downtown had changed my life more than I expected. The proximity to various establishments, parks, and the library opened up new opportunities. I was no longer car-bound and could just walk out of the house and be at a coffee shop, movie theater, or bookstore in 5 minutes. Nolan lived just 2 blocks away from me, and we often met for walks or lunches together. He introduced me to his neighbors, many of whom turned out to be former police officers or their spouses. Gradually, a new social circle formed around me, people my age with similar backgrounds and interests. One day, Nolan suggested I join the Waterbury Police Veterans Association. They meet once a week at the community center, he said. They discuss city issues and sometimes counsel current officers. I think you'd like it. I decided to give it a try, and I didn't regret it. At the first meeting, I met some old acquaintances I'd worked with over the years. They welcomed me with open arms, and I immediately felt part of the team. The chairman of the association, Frank Donovan, after hearing about my experience as a detective, suggested that I conduct safety seminars for the elderly. "We have a real epidemic of scams against seniors," he explained. "Who better than you to teach them how to defend themselves?" I liked the idea. After what I'd been through with Darcy and Quentin, I understood more than anyone how vulnerable seniors could be, especially in the face of those they trusted. I held my first workshop at a local retirement center. I talked about common fraud schemes, how to recognize manipulation even if it comes from loved ones, and legal steps to protect your assets. Of course, I didn't mention my personal story directly, but my experience gave me insight into the problem from the inside. The seminar was an unexpected success. Many participants came up to me afterward, sharing their stories and asking for advice. I realized that I had found a new calling, to use my bitter experience to help others avoid similar situations. Soon, I was regularly conducting such seminars not only in Waterbury, but also in neighboring towns. The local newspaper wrote an article about me under the headline, "Former Detective Teaches Seniors to Protect Themselves from Scammers." After that publication, people who were in difficult situations with relatives or outside scammers began contacting me. I was not a lawyer and could not give professional advice, but I could direct them to the right specialists and support them morally. My days were filled with new meaning. In the morning, a swim in the pool or a walk in the park. In the afternoon, seminars or meetings with veteran police officers. In the evening, reading or watching old movies that Laura and I loved. Sometimes I went to the theater or concerts with new friends. Life went on, and there was much more joy in it than I could have imagined after my separation from my daughter. I tried not to think about Darcy, but sometimes the memories came back, usually at night when I lay awake staring at the ceiling. I didn't hate her, but rather sadness and disappointment. Part of me still loved the little girl with pigtails who used to run around our garden and call me the best daddy in the world. But that little girl no longer existed, and I accepted that. About a year after I moved in, I found out about Darcy and Quentin by chance. Nolan came to my house for dinner and, a little hesitantly, said, "I don't know if you're interested, Orson, but I've heard some news about your daughter and her husband." "What news?" I asked, trying to keep my voice neutral. "They moved to Arizona after the whole thing. Quentin got a job as a financial consultant at some small firm. And Darcy—" He hesitated. "Darcy filed for divorce 3 months ago. That news surprised me. I always thought she and Quentin were one in their plans and ambitions." "Do you know why?" "Not exactly." Nolan shook his head. "But there are rumors that Quentin got caught up in some sort of client investment story, probably another scam, and Darcy decided not to be a part of it." I nodded, not knowing how to feel. Was this a sign that Darcy had learned some kind of lesson from our history after all, or just another calculated move on her part? "Either way," Nolan continued, "they're both far away and pose no threat to you. I just thought you should know." "Thank you." I looked at my friend sincerely. "I appreciate your concern." I couldn't sleep for a long time that night thinking about Darcy. I felt sorry for her. Despite everything she had done, I couldn't help but worry about her as a father. But at the same time, I realized that our paths had parted for good and there would be no reunion. Some wounds are too deep to ever fully heal. I woke up the next morning with a clear head and a firm decision to put the past behind me. I had a new life, new friends, a new purpose, and I intended to savor every day that was still allotted to me. Spring brought new changes. The community center where I conducted workshops offered me a full-time position as a senior safety counselor. It was a paying job, although money was not my main incentive. I was more than well off after selling my house. But the opportunity to systematically help people and share my knowledge and experience appealed to me. I agreed and soon developed a whole program, including not only seminars but also individual consultations, printed materials, and even a simple application for smartphones that helped elderly people to check suspicious calls and messages. I was assisted in creating the app by Harold Turner's grandson, a talented programmer who worked for a technology company. My initiative caught the attention of local authorities. The mayor of Waterbury invited me to a meeting and offered to expand the program to the entire city, with funding from the city budget. It was a recognition of the importance of my work, and I enthusiastically agreed. Work filled my days, but I found time for other interests as well. I joined a jazz club, started taking art history courses at the local college, became friends with the owner of a bookstore near my home, and joined their weekly literary discussions. Every Saturday I had lunch with Nolan at a small Italian restaurant near the park. We discussed the news, reminisced about old cases, and talked about books and movies. These meetings became especially important to me. Nolan was not just a friend. He was the person who helped me through the most difficult period of my life. One day, as we sat at our usual table by the window, Nolan suddenly asked, "Are you happy, Orson?" I wondered. "Am I happy?" After everything I'd been through, after losing Laura, after betraying Darcy, could I even expect to be happy? "You know," I answered slowly, "perhaps not as happy as I was with Laura when we were young and hopeful. But I'm happy with my life. I have a purpose, I have friends, I have the freedom to do what I want. It's a different kind of happiness, calmer, wiser, but no less valuable." Nolan nodded understandingly. "You deserve it, my friend. After everything you've been through, we all deserve a second chance," I said, raising my glass of wine. "Here's to new beginnings." That evening, back home, I sat on the balcony and watched the sun set over the horizon, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold. My thoughts were clear and calm. I thought about how strangely my life had turned out, about how events that seemed like tragedy, the betrayal of my daughter, the struggle for a home had eventually led me to a new, fuller life. If Darcy hadn't tried to trick me, I might still be living in the old house, alone, immersed in the past, neither discovering new possibilities nor helping others. I thought about the nature of family and how ties of blood do not always mean true intimacy or love. Darcy was my daughter by birth, but the people who now surrounded me, Nolan, Harold, and Rita, my new friends from the Veterans Association and Community Center, they had become my true family, based not on obligation or expectation but on mutual respect and genuine care. I felt no bitterness toward Darcy, though I couldn't forgive her completely. I hoped she had found her way in life, maybe even learned lessons from our history, but I no longer felt responsible for her choices or guilty about the kind of person she had grown into. She was a grown woman making her own decisions, and the consequences of those decisions were solely on her. As for me, I finally realized that I deserved to be respected and treated well, especially in the sunset of my life. I deserve to be surrounded by people who appreciate me for who I am, not for what I have or what they can get from me. The sun finally disappeared over the horizon and the first stars appeared in the sky. I remembered how Laura and I used to love to sit on the porch of our old house in the evenings and look at the stars. She always said that the stars were the souls of those we had loved and lost, watching us from the heavens. "I hope you can see me now, dear," I whispered into the night sky. "I hope you're proud of me for not giving up." A light breeze touched my face like a gentle touch, and for a moment I thought I smelled the scent of Laura's roses, warm, sweet, filled with memories of the best days of our lives. I smiled and closed my eyes, savoring this moment of peace and harmony. Life went on, and there were still many wonderful things in it, many opportunities for joy and meaning. And I was ready to accept each new day as a gift, as a chance to do something good, to help someone, to leave behind something valuable. After all, isn't that the point of our being on this earth? Not in the accumulation of possessions or money, not in the struggle for power or status, but in the connections we make with other people, in the good we do, in the love we give and receive. I realized that despite all the losses and disappointments, my life had been rich and full. And now, in my almost 80s, I still had the ability to create new memories, find new joys, and help others. It was a good realization, calm and profound. With it, I got up from my chair and went back to my apartment, ready for a new day, for new challenges and opportunities, for continuing this amazing journey we call life.